Good morning. My name is Penny Voss, and I'm the Vice President of Development for the Oklahoma Medical Research Foundation. And thank you for tuning in to our town hall. As loyal donors, you have shown your support by believing in our mission and making consecutive gifts to OMRF year after year to help our scientists in their quest to find better treatments and cures for devastating diseases. And trust me, we have put your dollars to good use. We hope that you received your loyal donor certificate and letter in the mail a few weeks ago. It's our way of thanking you and recognizing you each year. And in addition, we were planning a reception in your honor for later this spring, but unfortunately, due to the COVID-19 situation, we did have to cancel. So in an effort to try to give something back to you, our loyal donors, we planned our first Loyal Donor Town Hall. And it's our hope that you will enjoy hearing from Dr. Stephen Prescott about some of the latest developments at OMRF and how our scientists are working together on the COVID-19 pandemic. Again, thank you for your generosity, and I hope someday soon we'll be able to thank you again in person. And now I will turn it over to our panelist, Adam Cohen, Senior Vice President and General Counsel. Thank you.
Hi, Penny. Thank you. Well, very excited to see everybody here, although it's with a little bit of sadness because the Loyal Donor event is really one of our favorites at OMRF every year. We've had science lounges, which have been an opportunity for our loyal donors like you to come in and meet our scientists and get a little flavor for what we're doing, but also it's a chance for us to meet you guys and to say thank you. And so again, through this cold medium, we do say thank you. But I was just thinking this morning, last year, one of the scientists participating, Umesh Deshmukh, and his wife Harini Bhagavant were there taking samples from people and showing them how they do Sjogren's syndrome research using saliva. And right now, the two of them are busy stitching cloth masks for our clinics instead. Meanwhile, Dr. Joel Guthridge, who runs our biorepository, he was freezing little boba balls in nitrogen to show everybody. And now, as you'll hear a little more from Dr. Prescott, he is involved in a very exciting testing project for the state of Oklahoma. So I'm gonna start by asking some questions of Dr. Prescott. We've gotten a few submitted. I would encourage you guys, there is a chat function on Zoom, which you may be learning down at the bottom of your screen, and you can submit questions through that. And so I'd really encourage you to. We want this to be as interactive as possible. So Dr. Prescott, this is Dr. Stephen Prescott, the president of OMRF. Maybe you could tell us a little, what is the state of operations at the foundation right now?
We've converted our operations to being minimal, what we call the skeleton staff or the skeleton crew, something like that. About 3.5 weeks ago, am I right, Adam? Almost, something like that. We went into it gradually, and I'm going to focus on this because I think it's going to be relevant to other things we're going to say later on. We warned all of our scientists that we thought this was coming and had them start planning for what the laboratories and various efforts would look like if we had to come to what we did come to pretty quickly. So they were great. They began to plan how to wind down current experiments. They did not expand, for example, mouse colonies that they might have enlarged to do a big experiment. They did not do that. So what we have now is a group of something less than 100 people at OMRF every day in rotating groups. And the priorities are, of course, to keep the building safe and functional. So our facilities people are there, and Biomed, it handles all the instrumentation. But importantly, we also have our clinics are still open, although with reduced hours, because we have these patients who are on experimental therapies and can't go off of them, just even in the short run. But we've dialed down the number of elective visits and are mostly focused on patients who need the infusions of these medications. And then our staff from our comparative medicine group, that's who cares for the animals. They're there keeping our animals alive and safe. And then on a sort of lab by lab or program by program basis, there will be certain people on that list to come care for other really delicate items. For example, we would have cell lines growing in the laboratories, maybe from a very rare situation of a patient with a problem or something like that. And those have to be kept alive, have to be fed and nurtured on a regular basis. So we're down to that kind of level, but no active big experiments going on, with a couple of exceptions I think I'll come to. I saw another question earlier. We do have some active experiments in the COVID-19 area. And then the other one I would talk about was one that Adam raised before, and that is that another group is both in OMRF part of the time and across the street at the University of Oklahoma part of the time. And that group, that's from the program led by Dr. Judith James, but the project's being led by Dr. Joel Guthridge, whom Adam mentioned to you a little while ago with his liquid nitrogen experiment that he conducted for some of you last year. Joel has partnered with the Department of Pathology at the OU Medicine Group to develop a new type of test for the virus, the coronavirus. Now, it's based on the same thing you've read about in newspapers or seen on television, so-called PCR test. And this uses the same approach, but it's done with a different type of instrument that can do many at a time. And it's a sort of an instrument that we had used in genetic studies. But Joel had the idea to repurpose it to use it for this because it could do so many samples. So they developed that test. It's under review by the FDA, but it looks like we'll have that pretty soon. And it's going to be an excellent addition to what's available in Oklahoma. So but Joel's been leading that with a number, maybe about 8 scientists. I can't remember the exact number. They've been working on that project in and out across the street to get that going.
In addition to that testing project, are there any other sort of efforts that are forming or anticipated or ongoing involving OMRF scientists and research on COVID-19?
Yes. Some things would have happened almost automatically given our expertise in things like vaccines and particularly responsiveness to vaccines. All of you will remember that this is something that Dr. Judith James has been interested in for a long time, along with several of her colleagues in her program. And it derives from the idea, remember that they're all experts in these diseases called autoimmune disease, in which our body, our own immune system attacks us rather than outsiders. Excuse me. And that one characteristic of those diseases, particularly the one called systemic lupus erythematosus, is that they make very unusual antibodies and lots of them. So we were already focused on what's going to happen in those patients and what can we learn about the normal response from them, so forth. So that's all underway. There were some additional opportunities described in the big CARE package, CARE legislation that the Congress passed several weeks ago. And we've organized several new projects having to do with the antibody response, whether it's normal or abnormal and related type of topics, including what will happen when we have a vaccine and how will people respond to the vaccine. So those are all underway. In some cases, we've just applied for additional funding to support that, funding coming from the NIH, but some of those projects are already underway.
So we have a question here from a listener, or from one of our loyal donors, Sylvia from Norman. She has a question about herd immunity. What exactly is it and how long does it last?
Well, it's a terrific question. And I'll start by saying that I always hate this term. It comes back from some historical precedent, but it doesn't have the right ring as far as I'm concerned. What herd immunity means is that if a high enough percentage of the population has immunity to a certain disease, you basically exclude that disease from the society that you're talking about. And now the percentage can vary, but it needs to be pretty high. But I'm just going to make up some numbers now, so don't believe these numbers. I'm just using them as examples. If we said that 70 or 80% of the population in Oklahoma had immunity to COVID-19 virus, that would basically stop the spread of it. And you can think how this might be. Let's say that 8 out of 10 people are already immune, and you've got a gathering of 10 people at your church or somewhere. If somebody else comes and joins that group and they happen to have the coronavirus, well, 8 people are going to already be protected. It's only the 2 who didn't already have immunity who are at risk. And so if you decrease the sort of targets that could be infected, it will gradually cause the infection to just disappear from the community because it can't keep getting spread and spread and spread. So that's the logic behind vaccination or immunization strategies. And it's why we've been so successful in eliminating things like smallpox and polio and measles and mumps and so forth. I know many people on this call remember days, which a lot of young people don't even believe now, when people died from measles and from mumps and from polio. It was routine. Every year we'd see that. Now it's gone because we have vaccinated people, and we've got so many people vaccinated that even if a couple of cases break out, they don't spread very far. They're kind of stopped in their tracks. So that's what it means. I don't think we're going to wind up with herd immunity from the infection this time, because good news is it looks to me as if we've kind of gotten it to the point where it's going to be a pretty small percentage of the population that will have been infected this round. I think it probably will come back, and most of us still won't be protected. We'll need a vaccine to give us herd immunity that not only protects us individually, but then protects even people who didn't have that immunity just by stopping the spread.
So another question from Sylvia is about influenza. She said last fall there was an influenza outbreak, just like there are pretty much every season and at one level or another. Could those patients who developed influenza have any kind of immunity against COVID? And is it possible that some of the things that we thought this fall or winter were COVID were actually, were influenza, were actually COVID?
Yeah. Well, I'll deal with the first question and then come back. No, having had and recovered from influenza will not protect you against the coronavirus. They're both viruses, but viruses they belong to families. And both, so the flu or influenza, again, is a large family of many, many, many viruses, and that mutate, they change every year. Right? So, and we have them, you're type A and type B, and then there are different subsets within that. And so they change frequently, which is why we don't develop immunity without vaccines, because if you had influenza from a couple of years ago, you would be immune to that one, but that one will have kind of gone away and a new one will replace it. But so influenza is one big family. Okay? Coronavirus is another wholly different family, but they're similar in how they behave because they're viruses, but they're completely unrelated. So having immunity one does not provide immunity to the other. Now, within coronavirus, again, hundreds of types of virus. These cause everything from the common cold, is often the result of a coronavirus infection. So if you were to have had a coronavirus that caused a cold last year, you very well might be immune to that coronavirus coming back to you. Problem is, it's just like I said with flu, coronavirus also mutates regularly. So the virus itself changes regularly. And that's where this one came from. This was very similar to a coronavirus we already knew about, the one that caused SARS in Asia 17 or 18 years ago. And so this one was very similar to SARS, just a few mutations converted it into something entirely different. And so even patients who had recovered from SARS could still get infected with the COVID-19 virus. So it's a new game, and having had even a related virus in the corona family or an unrelated virus in influenza doesn't protect you. Now, if you've had this coronavirus and you were a patient with COVID-19 and recovered, are you protected from another round of this? The honest answer is we don't know for sure. I would say it's highly likely that you will be protected. That's what usually happens with these viral illnesses, and there's no reason now to think this one will be different in that respect. So we're going to have to wait and see. There have been a few reports of people in somewhere in China and maybe in Korea getting reinfected. Those are not well-proven cases. I mean, as far as whether it was reinfection or what happened, it's just going to take a little time for the epidemiology work to sort that out. And then we'll just have to have some time to see if people who have these antibodies really are protected. But I think it's likely to be the case that they are.
So just want to welcome on. I've seen that we've had more people joining the call. I'm Adam Cohen, and I'm talking to Dr. Steve Prescott, who is answering your questions about coronavirus. I would encourage people to use the chat function on Zoom. I don't have it on my phone, but I can get it on my computer. It's very easy just to submit a question down at the bottom of the screen. You'll see there's a place to put chat. So go ahead and enter your questions if you have some. Here's one from Larry in Oklahoma City. Larry says that he's read that hydroxychloroquine kills the virus by lowering your body's pH level. Is there another way to lower your pH level if you can't take the drug? Maybe by taking food or vitamins or some other supplement?
First off, that's not how hydroxychloroquine works. Well, I should say it's not proven that hydroxychloroquine kills the virus in your body, period. It can inhibit the virus in the laboratory, the types of experiments we do in the laboratory. And the mechanism for that's known, but it doesn't involve changing the pH, for example, of your body. And so we have lots of patients at OMRF who take hydroxychloroquine because it's used to treat systemic lupus erythematosus. So Dr. James and Dr. Chakravarty and others have real experts in this. And it works in those patients through a known mechanism, but it doesn't change your body's pH, or your acid-base balance. That's called pH in your body. I just say go more general. So that's not the mechanism, and so I would not encourage anybody to try to change their body pH. In part because you can't. Your body is very finely attuned, and it keeps your pH in a narrow range, and it just will not tolerate being out of that range. And a lot of things go into that, but the primary place to regulate it is in the kidneys, and the kidneys are just, if you have normal kidney function, are just going to keep your pH in a very narrow range, and it's not good to try to change it. It really can't, except for very briefly. And that's not good for you. It's dangerous and unhealthy. So that's not going to be the mechanism for hydroxychloroquine if it works. And we really still don't have any strong evidence that it does work. There are many trials going on now, so I hope we will soon. Initially, there were some reports that I thought were pretty encouraging. I guess I'm a little less encouraged right now. The one published report is very small, and it's a very unconvincing report from France of some cases there. So we'll see. Another few weeks we'll know whether it's had any measurable effect, because a lot of patients are being treated with it now. I would not take it prophylactically. You might have seen that one of those studies was stopped last week because patients developed a heart problem. This is known to happen. It was predictable. It was going to happen in some patients, but some patients probably died from being treated with that drug.
What about the antibiotic azithromycin? We've heard reports that this is being widely prescribed. Does that make sense as a treatment for a virus?
Not really. Now, azithromycin, it treats a group of bacteria. They're kind of unusual, and so there's a kind of a reason to maybe think that it could, to quote, give it a try, but it's been tried in other types of viral infections. It doesn't work. So it doesn't work in influenza, for example. It will work with bacterial infections of different types. So it's a valuable drug. I'm not being negative about azithromycin, or it's often called Z-Pak. So you may have had this for a sinus infection or something like that. But those are responding because they're bacterial infections, not viral infections. So I don't think it's very likely that it's going to be helpful. I haven't seen anything to suggest that it alone could be successful against coronavirus. But again, it's being tested, I think, primarily in conjunction with hydroxychloroquine. But again, in a few weeks to months, we'll know whether there was a meaningful effect of one or both of those medications.
So Gloria from Edmond has been staying on top of the news. She has seen the report of the tigers in the Bronx Zoo that were reported to have contracted the disease. So do we need to worry about our pets getting sick from us?
Well, I guess I could make a bad joke here about in Oklahoma, and if you have a tiger in your backyard, as clearly some people do. It turns. I don't know what to think about those reports exactly, whether they're going to turn out to be correct or not. But the answer, there was actually a really expert review of this by our chief veterinarian, Dr. Jenny Criley, in the paper. I'm going to say in the Oklahoman on Sunday, I believe it was. Adam can remind me if that's correct or not. Recently, where she goes into quite a bit of detail. But the answer is, it's really not something that we think is likely to happen, and not really to worry about.
Mm-hmm. Do we need to worry about getting COVID-19 from our pets?
Same answer. No. COVID-19 clearly came from animals, as many coronaviruses do. But these tend to be wild animals in which they are known to harbor these infections. In the case of COVID-19, almost certainly from bats. And it had been found, something very similar had been found in bats, I'm going to say 6 or 7 years ago. There was a very minor mutation from that virus that had been found in bats to one that then was discovered to cause COVID-19. In the case of SARS in Southeast Asia 13 years ago or 17 years ago, that one was it was again in a wild animal, probably in a civet, but that's a little bit argued. Strange wild animal in Asia, and one called MERS in the Middle East came from camels. So it's very common that they come from animals, but typically wild animals. And in the case of this one, of the COVID-19, almost certainly came from the fact that there are different dietary habits in that part of the world, and people eat bats, and they had them in markets that sell wild animal meat. And at least it's thought right now that may have been the source that got into humans. So what typically happens in these is that whatever that animal source is has to be in close contact with humans, or humans eat it. In this case, or it was probably also the case with the SARS, to get it in there. So it's typically not found in pets. I don't think there's been any example of that. Of all the ones we've had recently, and including Ebola and Zika, are all in the same category. Different types of viruses, but the same sort of transmission patterns, and not from pets, but from wild animals.
So here's a question from Beth in Moore. Beth says, I know we're supposed to stay home, but what about visiting our own family outside of our home, people like our grandparents, our grandchildren, brothers, sisters, and the like? Is that okay?
It's going to be a long-winded answer, I guess, as most of mine are. I think there's somebody on the phone on the call that I talked to on the phone about this yesterday. Similar, a little pretty complicated situation there. I'll confess that my wife and I talked our daughter and son-in-law and granddaughters who are isolated out at their weekend home in the Hamptons outside of New York, but they have a tradition of going in to have a Seder to begin Passover with some Jewish friends in the city. They have it every year, and they were going to go in and do that and they're very, very close to these people and so forth. And I said, please don't. because the husband in that family is a practicing physician who's still seeing patients in New York City. They have 4 relatively small children, or teenagers and young down children. You don't know who they've been exposed to. That's the problem, right? So the more people you bring in to one of these family dinners or some kind of events, to be confident that it's safe, you need to know what everybody's been doing for the last couple of weeks. Have somebody been doing something that is high risk? Are they been meeting lots of people? So could they bring the virus into the family group? Inadvertently. Of course, no one would suspect them of doing it on purpose, but they could inadvertently have been exposed a day or two before and then suddenly bring it into your group. So I just say, you be really cautious about that. Don't assume that because you love them, everything is going to be safe. It won't necessarily. Now, having said that, if you know that, let's say your grandparents, if they've been isolated this last couple of weeks and they're fine, they don't have any fever, no symptoms and so forth, and you want to go visit them, I think that's safe. I mean, assuming you're the same, yet you don't have any fever, you're not exposed, so that's okay. As that circle gets bigger, the risk increases. Right? So that's the way I would use it. I talked to somebody who, again, just a couple of days ago, they canceled the tradition here in Oklahoma City of a large family Easter dinner, and the grandmother was going to host this and had already had the caterer arranged and everything else. And the children and grandchildren said, yeah, it's too big a group. It would have been 30 people or something like that. So don't do it if there's any risk like that. As we start coming out of this in the next few weeks, obviously we'll be able to start back. Obviously things like that will be among the first things to come back right before going to restaurants or somewhere where you don't know anybody or know anything about what they've been doing. So I'm trying to be sympathetic to the desire to see loved ones, but just say, be careful and use good judgment about how many people and if you know what they've been doing.
So I've decided to break out a visual aid for this next question, which came from our friends at the AARP. A lot of us are now wearing cloth masks when we go out in public. And if we're wearing these cloth masks, do we need to wash them every day?
Well, we need to wash them periodically. I don't know if every day is necessary, but we certainly do need to. Remember, the reason that masks are being recommended now and that they may work is they keep anything that I would sneeze or cough or spray on you here by me, right? So obviously, if I'm coughing or sneezing into it, the things are going to accumulate there. Yes, it's prudent to wash it now and then. If you're not coughing or sneezing, you don't have to wash it very often. If you are coughing and sneezing, maybe we need to talk about something else. But yes, it's sensible to wash and sterilize your mask on some kind of regular basis, scheduled depending on how dirty it is. And remember that the reason it works is only if everybody uses it, or let's say we could go back to the herd immunity question. Nearly everybody uses it because this mask is not protecting me from you. It's protecting you from me. So if I'm spreading the virus, even if I don't have symptoms, it keeps it in. So if everybody keeps it in, there's less virus around to be infectious among all the rest of us. So that's why there was this change from the people who aren't sick shouldn't wear masks to recommendation now that there are. Initially, there just weren't enough masks around, and we wanted to put them on the sick people and on healthcare workers. Now that there are more masks available and people are making their own, this was made by my daughter-in-law, now it's sensible for all of us when we're out or when we're interacting with other people to wear a mask. I mean, obviously, I'm not sitting here talking to my computer, but if we were in person, I'd have on a mask.
So speaking of the mask and protecting all of you from me, I feel fine. Is it possible that I might be carrying the virus so that I can infect other people, but really have no symptoms myself?
Yeah, the answer is yes. We know for sure now that people can have no symptoms and be spreading the virus. They have the virus in their nasal passages or their throat and be spreading it. There are several well-documented cases of that now. So that's one of the most challenging things about this, because even though we may take somebody's temperature in order to let them into our building or whatever, it could be somebody who's in that pre-symptomatic stage. They don't have any fever, they don't have any symptoms yet. They might tomorrow or the next day, but they don't today. So that's another reason for recommending wearing masks widely. That should help in that situation. But yes, asymptomatic people can spread the infection. That reminds me, I didn't entirely answer Sylvia's question about people who might have had some undiagnosed illness back in the fall. And could that have been coronavirus? Yes, and for the same reasons I just said. And even if it's pretty mild, it could have been a mild version of it. I think it's unlikely. And there's been already some, not nearly enough, but some testing around the country, even a tiny bit here in Oklahoma, that suggests that there hasn't been much in the way of coronavirus infection in general. So probably not. A couple of weeks ago, I probably would answer that differently. I would have said, yeah, maybe. It could have been here sooner than we thought, but I don't think that's going to be the case now.
So we've heard discussions of a term called viral load. Does the amount of virus you're exposed to make a difference in the severity of the symptoms that you might later develop?
Well, again, this disease hasn't been around long enough for us to know for sure the answer to that. But almost for sure, the load or the amount of virus you got probably won't dictate how severe a case you get, but it will dictate the likelihood of whether you get infected or not. Right? So let's just take the extreme. If there was on this desk I'm sitting at, if there was some virus on this desk and I picked up one virus particle on my finger, then I scratch my nose, it gets in my nose and I get infected. Well, that one virus has got to go find a place that it can be happy, latch onto a cell, get in that cell, replicate, make more viruses, go on to next cells and so forth and so on. But it has to start with one virus. And the odds are that, I'll sneeze and blow it out, or that one of my white blood cells will kill it before it gets firmly entrenched. What if I picked up 10,000 as I wipe my hands here? Now I've got 10,000 viruses all looking for a place to land. And even if I sneeze or if my white cells are trying to find them, some of them are going to get through. So the load is very important with respect to, do you get infected or not? And we know this to be true with almost any infectious disease. So it would just stun me if it's not true with coronavirus. And it has to be true. Right? Now, that probably does not predict whether you're going to have a bad response or not. That is almost certainly more dependent on you. And do you have some underlying disease? So the ones we know that are bad are anything in the lungs, chronic lung disease, obstructive disease, or asthma, or anything like that is a big risk factor. At the beginning, it looks like diabetes is a pretty big risk factor. Heart disease is definitely one. Any problem where people's immune system is compromised, whether it's a disease like an autoimmune disease where we're treating them to suppress their immune system, or patients with cancer who are getting treatments that suppress the immune system. Those are people who are at real risk of getting widespread and deadly disease. And it's why we see such much more dramatic effects as people get older. Those of us who are older just have more of those diseases.
So I think you talked a little bit about this, but we just got a question that sort of verges on the topic of once you've recovered from the virus, are you immune or can you get it again?
Yeah, I did touch on it earlier. The answer is we think the answer is going to be yes, that you'll be immune. Not proven yet, but it's very, very likely that people are going to be immune. It's just what happens with most of these types of illnesses. And if you have a good immune system and you develop antibodies, you're likely immune. So that'll be the next phase of when you'll start hearing more and more about antibody testing. That's what we're talking about. For patients who've had the virus and recovered, did they make a substantial number of antibodies in response to it that in theory should protect them in the future, and may have other ramifications as well that we may talk about. Could those be used to treat other patients, for example?
Here's a very specific question from a listener who has friends who are in the hospital with COVID-19, and one is about to receive a plasma transfusion from a survivor of the disease. And she is asking, what are the chances that this will work?
Well, we're going to find out soon because there's big experiments going on to do this. That's what I alluded to before. So this can be called a convalescent plasma. That means people who are convalescing, recovering from the infection. If they've had a good immune response and have antibodies to the coronavirus, one can just transfer some of their plasma into a patient who's sick, and you're basically just sort of transplanting in the antibodies. Right? There's another term for this that you may see around. It's sometimes called passive immunization. So there's no vaccine involved. When we have a vaccine some months from now, we'll inject a vaccine, as always, then your body will make its own antibodies to that vaccine that came from the coronavirus. Right? And you'll have them forever. So your immune system will keep them, and it'll remember that it's been there, and they can come back and help you if you're infected again. That's the regular kind of immunity. We call this passive immunity. It means we're giving you some antibodies that somebody else made in their body. And the problem is they won't last very long. The antibodies may come do their job, but your body will pretty quickly get rid of those proteins that came from the other person, and you'll get rid of those antibodies. And you won't have made any of your own. You won't have any in reserve to call on again in the future. But this is a very old approach, quite more than 100 years old, and called plasma therapy or serum therapy, or then say the more technical term is passive immunity. And it's definitely worth trying in really sick people. Right now, it's, I think, being mostly done in people who are the sickest ones in ICUs. And there are trials going on. I would be very optimistic about this. I think this is likely to work and be helpful in many of these cases. There are already some anecdotal reports that before it appears that it worked.
So the kind of antibodies that people generate against this disease, is there a way now that those of us who think maybe we were exposed, that we could get tested and know whether or not it would be safe for us to go about our business again?
Yeah, well, I'm going to start with the point there at the end. It'd be very valuable to know if who is immune to infection with the coronavirus. Let's start with hospitals, right? If hospitals knew that certain physicians, nurses, technicians already had antibodies and were protected, well, obviously you're going to assign those people to be working in the ICUs caring for the COVID-19 patients because they can't get infected again. So that protects your people who haven't been infected, and you have them take care of non-infected patients. So you can imagine that same strategy in all kinds of work environments, right? So it would be very useful to know that. And these tests are coming fast. I can't tell you how many hours I spent on the phone yesterday talking with a big consortium nationwide of leading universities and others who are working on different tests and partnering with companies to try to get the best tests out that can do lots of these quickly, really with the long-term aim of getting everybody back to work and getting back to a more normal way of behaving in our society. So it's going to be really, yes, the answer is pretty soon you're going to be able to get an antibody test, and it will tell you whether you've got antibodies to this virus. And again, within the few weeks to months, we'll know how accurate that predicts whether you're protected. I think it's going to be good predictor, but we'll see about that. Getting those tests and getting really good ones and accurate ones is a tough job. The types of tests are pretty standard that we're going to use, but obviously you want the test to tell you if you have that antibody, but you want to know that it's the correct antibody we're talking about. And remember I said earlier that there are lots of coronaviruses. We've all been infected with coronaviruses before for the common cold and things like that. So we'll have antibodies to coronaviruses. Do we have an antibody to this coronavirus, the one that when it got mutated caused COVID-19? So that's the key. The antibody has to be very specific for this one. Otherwise, the fact that you have antibodies will be meaningless. It has to be an antibody to this one. So that's taking a little bit of time to get that made so it's that accurate, and we can make real predictions on it.
So
this is an area where we're deeply involved at OMRF. So.
A lot of people are very interested, including legislators, business owners, all of us who've spent the last month in our home. What are some of the metrics that you would be looking at for when you think we can start returning to some semblance of normalcy?
Yeah, well, obviously, I think the one that gets the most attention that everybody pays attention to, and it legitimately, is the curve, right? So, how many new cases are happening? How many people are being hospitalized, so forth and so on. I think the really good news is that this social distancing appears really to have worked. I mean, to really have lowered the rate of infection spread. And the impact that it's had on hospitals and other facilities in our communities. So it's been successful. Now, obviously, it's come at a colossal cost, but we have avoided, except for a few places like New York, which has been horrific, but most of the rest of us have avoided these just horrible scenes that we saw from Italy and other places. So if that continues over the next little while, that this rate is either not increasing or one hopes decreasing the number of new cases, I think that's the time that we start saying, yeah, let's start back carefully. As I mentioned earlier, I think it'll be the opposite of how we went out. So, say for example, at OMRF, we started some things, and we had a lot of our administrative groups work remotely for a week before we really downsized that minimal group. And we'd already closed our gym, we had closed our cafeteria, we had closed our facility to outsiders, except that we knew and had some specific reason to be there. So we'll probably go back in the same, I should say now, we may require everybody to wear a mask already. We'll go back the same way. Everybody's gonna have to wear a mask. It's gonna be, we're down to the bare essentials now. We're gonna go back to a little beyond that. We'll probably start allowing some experiments to start underway, but we'll have the labs use rotating shifts so that we don't have this dense grouping in the labs. We won't open our cafeteria initially. We won't open the gym. We'll see how it goes. I think Governor Cuomo in New York had a great analogy I liked. He said, this will be like turning a valve. He said, it's not flipping a switch, turn a valve. You turn the valve, start opening it up a little bit, but you watch the meter, what happens on the meter when you open the valve a little bit. That's a very good analogy. We'll need to watch the meter as we begin to let people start doing normal activities. Do we suddenly see a bump up in cases, as more infections? We'll need to revisit what we're doing. And then I'd say the other piece that I think is going to be really important, and we're really scrambling trying to get this in place, is there are various strategies about testing. If we had more testing available, could be very powerful in using this. And it's one that we're working on right now. I mentioned earlier this new viral testing approach that we've developed. We believe that we can do that, and we're going to test sometime soon whether we can do this in a really, truly cost-effective way where we could, for example, on day one that we plan to reopen, have anybody who plans to come to work has to be tested for the viral test that day. We'd have a report by the next morning, maybe even later that same day. We'd say, okay, everybody who has no virus allowed to come in, and on a weekly or some type basis, we would test again. We would test temperatures every day, things like that. Those are the types of ideas we're discussing. We haven't implemented it yet, but when the rates come down to a level that looks like it's safe to start moving around a little bit, we'll start trying to open back up our facility using strategies like that. And we're trying to develop them in a way that could be useful to lots of other organizations as well. So that's a non-definitive answer, but it's the way we're thinking about it right now.
Well, it's understandable. I mean, this situation, obviously, nothing has gone exactly as predicted. But with that in mind, I'm going to try to make you predict a little. So Governor Stitt, is looking every day, recently extended the safer at home order yesterday, I believe, for people 65 and over till May 6th. For, the rest of Oklahoma, it looks like that is set to expire May 30th. With the rate of infections and death in the state, do you see Oklahoma ready to begin releasing that valve a little bit early next month?
Yeah, you said May 30th. April 30th was the other one.
Sorry, yeah.
So we still got another couple of weeks before we get there, but I'm a little nervous about it now. I mean, obviously I'm not charged with making the decision that have to do with these other issues about our economy and all, which are really crucially important. I don't deny that. And I'll say that we've been fortunate so far in Oklahoma, relatively speaking. The impacts have not been nearly as bad here as in many other places. And I believe that the steps that were taken have been effective in lowering the rate of spread of transmission of the illness. And my concern is I really want to see it. It looks like it's really leveled off or dropping down before we start loosening the restrictions, because I just fear that if we do it too quickly, that suddenly we'll be right back to trying to shutting things down, because we'll get a surge in the number of cases. So, should it be the 1st of May or the first week in May or the second week in May? I'm not sure. I think it's a little early yet to know that. I know that businesses need to start planning. We're planning at OMRF. We war game this every Monday morning, right? And about, what would it mean and when could we do it and so forth. So I would encourage people to think through it in that way. Now, we've got a little advantage because we've got a lot of experts who know this world really well. But that's how we're thinking about it. And it's not unreasonable to think of sometime in May. I'm just not willing right now to say what time in May.
Mm-hmm. So when things open back up again, a lot of health experts have predicted that we may see a second wave or recurrent outbreaks across the country with the virus resurfacing. So as we look ahead, what modifications to life as we used to know it should we expect to encounter in our everyday lives?
Well, I think one of the good things is I think almost all of us are voluntarily going to do things that we didn't do before, right? We are going to follow the recommended guidelines about washing our hands and using hand sanitizer regularly. I predict that a lot that doorknobs and door handles and elevator buttons and also such things like that are going to be cleaned a lot more frequently than they have been in the recent past in businesses as well as homes, but in businesses, and then we're all going to be paying attention to that. I mean, just did somebody come wipe down the doorknobs while I'm sitting here having a bite to eat or something like that in this restaurant? If they don't, then I'm not coming back here, kind of thing. So I think all of us are going to be more alert and doing things we probably should have been doing in the past but didn't. I suspect that at least for a while that we're going to continue to wear masks, and it'll be a cultural change, but which is common, of course, in various parts of Asia, that you see people wearing masks regularly during flu season or whenever. So I think that may wind up being a standard part of our lives. I don't have any good sense yet of how are we going to, so I think many things we can deal with by continuing some distancing. I can't remember who said it some TV show I saw said, well, you know, when restaurants reopen, that they'll have fewer tables and be farther apart. Well, okay, that makes some sense. You know, it may not make sense to the restaurateurs who may not be able to run a business on that basis, but things like that, staying a little bit farther apart. But how are we going to have sporting events if we do that? So there are a lot of things that are big challenges that are parts of our culture that I just don't have a sense yet of how we're going to do that until we get a vaccine or other ways to really directly manage this as opposed to just trying to prevent its spread.
So there, you said the magic word there, vaccine. What are we looking at in terms of the chances of developing a successful vaccine, and sort of a timeline, and what can we hope for that to achieve?
I think the likelihood of a good vaccine is very high. There are many things being tested right now. I mean, a remarkable number, to be honest, and lots of support for it. I think you saw that the Gates Foundation has contributed billions of dollars to be, you know, guaranteeing that the manufacturing of vaccines will come off quickly. It's one of the things we're involved in peripherally in this consortium I mentioned earlier. And so pretty quickly we'll have vaccines being tested. Well, there are already being tested right now. And we'll begin to have a sense of whether they are effective. We won't be entirely sure of that, or I hope we won't, because obviously you need a lot of infections going on to know if they were reducing infections. But yeah, so some trials have started, and we may actually have information about that pretty quickly. We'll know for sure whether patients respond or subjects respond to making antibodies, and, you know, and a good type of antibody to the virus. We'll know that pretty quickly. Within a few months, we'll know that. And we'll know whether the virus is safe or not. So I think I'm very optimistic that we will have a vaccine and it'll be effective and safe. And we'll begin to know that in some months. When will it be available? Well, I heard an interview with Bill Gates yesterday, and of course the Gates Foundation is very involved in this. He's quite knowledgeable about vaccines. It's been a passion of the foundation for years. And he said fall of 2021 is the earliest he thinks we could have a vaccine out. And that's from somebody who's pretty aggressive and optimistic. That's probably right. I've been hopeful it might be earlier in 2020. It won't be before 2021. I can't imagine it would be, but I was hoping for maybe spring, but yeah, I think the best estimates now are more than a year from now.
So a couple of months ago, no one was talking about COVID-19, the disease that we thought about when we thought about the major sort of killers, or the things that were, you know, life-altering, were diseases like cancer, heart disease, Alzheimer, autoimmune diseases. What does the world look like for research on these conditions, which have not gone away and which will continue to affect so many people?
I've been involved in a lot of discussions about this, including with some of our congressional leadership and others, that nobody disputes it right now that any scientist who has something to offer to the COVID-19 effort should be doing that, and everything else should be put on hold. And we didn't go into it, but back to this, trying to develop an antibody test. One of our scientists who studies cell division, which is relevant to cancer and birth defects, well, she's currently converted her lab into trying to make the protein that the antibody would react to. So this is not, she's not an infectious disease person, she's not an immunologist, but she has molecular biology skills that can be used in a certain project. So that to me is perfectly sensible for now in sort of this emergency phase. As I said, we're going to have good antibodies and good viral tests pretty soon now, and they're going to be good. And then the challenge there will be how to deploy them properly. That'll be a public health epidemiology type problem, not the kind of thing that OMRF does. And so at that point, once we're past this emergency phase, our scientists are going to go back to work on what they were interested in before, which is primarily the list that you just went through, Adam: heart disease, stroke, cancer, issues of aging, severe forms of arthritis, autoimmune disease, patients with MS, so far, with Alzheimer's. We'll be back to work on those because, as you're right, they haven't gone away. And I'm happy to say that I had a wonderful discussion with with congressional representatives from this area, and they get it. And my concern there was that the CARE Act had a bunch of additional funding for work in COVID-19 with new money to do that. But then it also mandated to the NIH that they review all their portfolios of everything else and convert as much as possible to being relevant to COVID-19. Well, as a temporary measure, that's fine, but temporary measures in the government tend to become permanent measures, and that would amount to a cut in heart disease, stroke, cancer, so forth and so on. So I tried to make that point. They've got it. I think they're going to pay attention to that and make sure that there continues to be adequate funding for those problems once we get past this emergency phase of all hands on deck for COVID-19.
What about the time lost to experimentation? We often hear that with medical research, and I think all of us who've had people in our lives affected by dread diseases know that there is no time to lose. Have we lost time here, and will that affect our sort of timelines for developing potential treatments for some of these diseases that touch so many of our lives?
I'd say, yes, there's no doubt that we've lost some time in all these diseases. So I'd say the good news is it's not a lot of time that we've lost. And in some cases, we'll be able to make it up, because particularly if it's at the discovery stage where we're doing things in a laboratory, sometimes you can make those go a little faster. You can kind of parallel some things. And remember that that's not the slow part anyway. The slow part of getting from discoveries to treating patients is really in the clinical trials phase. And while I'm certain there have been many clinical trials held up, you say, well, they're now going to be 2 months later, but that's on a baseline of years, of several years. So yes, I don't think there's any doubt that it's going to delay things, but maybe not too much. But it's inevitable. I mean, Memorial Sloan Kettering, the famous cancer center, basically closed. I mean, there are some patients still getting, sort of emergency treatments, but sort of standard cancer treatments has been on hold in New York City for the last month. So yes, so both the clinical studies there, developing new medications, and even crucial treatments for some patients just haven't happened. My son-in-law is a surgeon who operates on people with breast cancer, and he hadn't been able to operate for several weeks because of no elective surgery going on. So those women are sitting there with breast cancer and no treatment yet. So yeah, it absolutely has disrupted both medical care of existing diseases and the research into how to make that care better, such as what we do.
So quick, we're almost at the end of our hour here, but I've got a question from a Penny in Oklahoma City. If someone wants to help OMRF in our researchers' efforts to fight COVID-19 or other diseases, what can they do?
Well, I want to join with Penny and Adam of thanking all of you for your support in the past. Obviously, we're going to continue to need financial support. We're okay financially. We keep everybody on payroll, but and this is going to be hard times for everybody. I understand that, but obviously, we'll continue to need private support. But I also want you to continue to pay attention, or we'll get back in touch with you if there are other things. We've talked a lot about these antibody studies. We may be looking for people who will donate some blood, a tube of blood, to help us develop these antibody tests, or even come have the antibody test directly yourself. So we'll be looking for research volunteers at some point. So if you're so inclined, that'd be a great addition, as well as the generous support you've given us in the past. And please send any emails with ideas or suggestions. We'd love to hear them.
And you can send those to the contact@omrf.org account. So we're at the end of our hour. We'd like to thank everybody for tuning in. We really appreciate each and every one of you. Thank you for your support of OMRF, and thank you for doing all you can to help our researchers and to help in the fight against COVID-19. And we hope a year from now that we can be welcoming you back to OMRF, and that we can do another Loyal Donors event for all of you. So thank you. Be safe.